Hello, everybody, and welcome to another Team Top Deck. Well, I guess this will be the first of its kind. This is a Team Top Deck deck tech. So today I'll be going over elves. I have sold out of uh, my Storm deck, as I think with Death Shadow in the format, Storm is fairly unplayable. Really, Death Shadow is everything that you don't want to see in a matchup that's especially going to be as popular as it is. It's got a lot of, once again, this is for Storm, not Elves. It has a lot of disruption in the form of discard, which is far worse than counter magic because you can't play around it and wait for it. You can't make them attack you on your terms. So you kind of just have to go off before you're ready and before they strip things out of your hand. It has a fast clock, so you can't just fall back on the eventually all past in flames or top deck a gifts ungiven plan. And it has a lot of removal, and Storm has recently become very, very weak to that, as it no longer plays no longer plays Pyromancer's Ascension, but instead plays 7 to 8 creatures that are basically Goblin Electromancers. So because of that, I think Storm, while its Goldfish is a lot better than it's ever been before, is in a much worse place than it has been previously, and I don't really want to hold on to the deck because I don't see that changing anytime soon. Um, so anyway, because of that, I've moved on to elves. As you can see over here, I have a few different kinds. I have the Abzan, the green-black, and the green-white. Um, Abzan, I feel, is the most powerful, but also has really, really bad mana and a weaker burn matchup, which I'm not a fan of. Green-white elves, I think, has the best sideboard, but loses a lot of power from Shaman of the Pack, which I do believe is a very, very good card, at least game one. Gives you a lot of free wins that, not in the way Dredge gives you free wins, though, like, free wins in the sense of, well, oops, I dropped 2 shamans off a cord, or off of a Coco, or I, just post combat drop a shaman, pre combat drop a shaman. It provides a lot of reach, and it can, combined with the mana engine of elves, it can be absolutely devastating. So I don't like that green white loses that. I've tried a couple experiments to kind of, how do I put it? To kind of try and fill that void. Tried playing a few of the worst Elf Lord in Elvish Champion, the Forest Walk Lord. Um, really don't like that, so probably gonna try a more traditional green-white Elves deck. But right now, I think I am definitely favoring green-black, as it has good mana, and it has fairly good sideboard cards. Not not quite the level that I'd like. I'm thinking of trying Golgari Charm sometime soon for Wraths, but you're never going to be able to keep, well, very rarely going to be able to keep that open on turn 3 to stop an Anger of the Gods. So maybe, no, Anger gets past the Elf enchantment. What's it called again? It's 1 black, 1 other. Uh, Whenever an elf you control dies, you get a 1/1 elf token, if the elf that died wasn't a token. I might try that, I might try some other stuff. Um, but yeah, I don't really. You lose a little bit of power and resiliency from going black instead, but you do get Thoughtseize, and that's not irrelevant. And you have a lot more consistent and stable mana. Green white has a little bit better mana, but once it gets to a certain stability point, I don't think getting more stable is going to be that relevant. Like, mono green has the best mana base. That doesn't mean it's better than playing a second color. Um, Even if you were able to play all the other hate cards and such. So, well, no, at that point, it's definitely worth it. Sorry, forget I said that. I was an idiot for a second there. Anyway, getting down to the deck itself. I have, for the mana base, 19 lands. I tried out 18 for a while. Definitely don't like that. That was in Abzan, though. Maybe in here. No, it was always a land number problem, never a color problem. Occasionally it was a color problem. Anyway, playing one Pendelhaven. This would otherwise be a forest, but there's no reason for it to be outside of Blood Moon Fears or way more Ghost Quarters than I'm expecting. Uh, it's basically a forest in that the first one, the first one is. After that, Legendary starts to become a thing. But it taps for green, comes into play untapped, and has added utility of making a 1/1, a 2/3, which is, well, that's quite big. At least for a pump, or a difference off of a land for basically no investment and very, very low opportunity cost. Helps turn your Lawnmower Elves, Elvish Visionaries, Elf Tokens, all into 2/3s for blocking or attacking purposes. It can make combat a little more complex for your opponent. Overall, doesn't happen too often, but when it comes up, it's fairly relevant and can be game winning. So play one Pendelhaven. I definitely am a fan of the card. Maybe if there were more Blood Moon decks, if there were more Blood Moon decks, I'd turn it into a forest, but I don't really view that as a concern. Next up, play one Overgrown Tomb. Just as another green-black duel that can cast some of my sideboard cards without having any real problem on that. It's been pretty relevant. I like having the 9th green-black duel and 9th, black source for Thought Seizes and Fatal Pushes. I've considered running another, but I think playing the second forest is more relevant, and I don't want to drop below 3 Cavern. Next up is, and I definitely don't want to drop this next card, which is Horizon Canopy. So you might be asking, Scotty, oops, no, you just learned my name. You have no white cards outside Kitchen Finks, and that's pretty much a green card. What are you thinking? Well, here's what I'm thinking. Take a look at Horizon Canopy. Take out the white. Still playable? Still playable. Still really, really good. I would not play Elves without Horizon Canopy. And I probably wouldn't play Elves without Horizon Canopy as a 4 of unless it was a burn-heavy meta. And then I'd probably be looking at green-white Elves, because they have a couple more ways to make that matchup, well, fairly miserable for an opponent. But basically this is just here because it's an untapped green source that can draw you a card in the late game, mid game, or with incredibly aggressive hands early game. The number of games you'll win off of just having that land on top not be a land, or having that land that served you well up until that point just become a new elf. It's not zero, and it really adds up over time. Same thing with the Pendelhaven. It's a utility forest, and I think that's very, very valuable over having a basic forest. The life loss isn't a real concern. After you get one mana dork down, normally you have more mana than you know what to do with anyway. Or you'll be attacking or killing them, so it's not too bad. In fact, not too bad. The life loss isn't that bad, is what I'm trying to say here. Next up, we have 4 Gilt-Leaf Palace, just one of the best green-black duels for elves. It does have a downside in needing to have an elf, so if you keep a strange hand post-board involving some number of Thoughtseize but no elves, or you've already played all your elves, or you play it as your last land because you needed to play, say, a Cavern of Souls, and then you wanted to get in your tap land while you could, and then Blooming Marsh had to come down because otherwise it comes in tapped and you need that 4th land for Coco, but you don't have an elf. Very, very circumstantial that it doesn't come in untapped, but it normally comes in untapped. So just green-black duel, very good. I'd play 4. I can't think of another better one. 2 forest. I was playing 1, cut a Cavern of Souls for it recently. Just found that Path to Exile and Ghost Quarter were happening fairly frequently, at least once, and had the forest already a few too many times. Made their second path really good. I didn't really like that because you can count on about 2 paths per game or 1 Ghost Quarter per game. So it's really the path here. Because if they path, they're probably going to Snapcaster that path, and, well, getting the forest on both of those is just a way to get a little bit of extra value, and you're not losing too much by cutting 1 Cavern, since it doesn't cast your sideboard cards anyway. So, in fact, it's better in a lot of situations post-board. So I definitely play the secondary forest over the fourth Cavern of Souls. Also helps against Blood Moon, but if you get to play one of your, well, pretty much one of 12 1-drops first, that's not, well, I guess one of 8, the Mystics or the Law Noirs. Not so much the Heritage. Anyway, getting off track. Then Blood Moon's not normally a problem. Although if it's Scred Red, that would be a different story because of all the Wraths that deck likes to play. Anyway, off topic again. So, Cavern of Souls. I play 3 Caverns. That's your best land against counterspell decks most of the time, but one of your worst lands outside of that, outside of basic forest being your actual worst land outside of that, but it still helps cast Shaman of the Pack, so I definitely am a big fan of Cavern of Souls, even as mana fixing. It's very good, very powerful, and has some very good utility. So, I'm a big fan of having this card in Elves. I could see cutting another one to play another forest, or maybe the only thing, maybe another Overgrown Tomb, but I wouldn't drop below 2. I think the utility of just having uncounterable creatures is too big of a factor for that. Although I could see adding a little more consistency to the mana base, or a little more resiliency to both Blood Moon, Path to Exile, and other such effects for your mana base could outweigh that, but I don't see that being too much of an issue, so 3 Caverns it is. And lastly, we get to Blooming Marsh, which is basically an untapped duel in this deck. It's pretty rare that you need your 4th land to come in untapped. It's occasionally relevant, but it's pretty rare that you need it to, and often you never get to 4 lands anyway when you have 4 mana, so Blooming Marsh is pretty much just an untapped green-black source that doesn't cost you life. It's very good, so I play 4. Finally, we get to our creatures. That was a long time I spent talking about lands and going on segues, like this one. Anyway, start with Elvish Mystic, exactly the same card as a Llanowar Elf. Both are Elf Druids that cost 1 green mana, and are 1/1s that tap for a green. Basically, one of these is what you want to drop turn 1, even more than your next 1-drop, Heritage Druid. The reason you'd rather drop a Llanowar is because it gives you access to 3 mana if you make your second land drop, and then you could play your Heritage Druid and other elves as though you had played a turn 1 Heritage Druid, except have access to more mana because you had more mana to start. So you can empty your hand faster if you just play one of these. And that's really what you want to do in the early turns with elves. Later in the game you might want to hold stuff back because you don't need to fully commit, but that's not too relevant on turn 2, unless you expect an Anger of the Gods. And even then, I would still like to get onto the board as fast as I can turn 2. Unless I'm on the draw. No, I think you have to commit pretty hard. So yeah, just point being, really what you want to be doing turn 1 is either Elvish Mystic or Llanowar Elves. I tried out 7, I really didn't like it. I found that the difference in the hands where you had a turn 1 Llanowar Elf or Elvish Mystic were so much better for you than the hands you didn't. So I ended up deciding to go with the full 8, and I definitely prefer it. I ended up cutting 1 Nettle Sentinel for that, but in the grand scheme of things, Nettle Sentinel is only really good with your most combo-y hands, and Llanowar Elves and Elvish Mystic are better with all of your hands. So I prefer playing the 8 to the 4. Then we have Heritage Druid, which is probably one of the best creatures in your deck. Actually, probably the best creature in your deck, at least for mana production. It just helps you spew your hand onto the board really fast, and it turns all of the creatures you play into more mana. So you can have some really degenerate openings with this. This leads to a lot of your turn 3 kills and is partially in fact, is almost solely responsible, other card necessary being Dwinin's Elite, for the possibility of a turn 2 collected company, which is rare, but it can happen. Don't think it's a real thing or a reason to play this deck. It's not going to happen that often. I'd say it happens even more rarely than a turn 2 storm kill, which should tell you a lot because those are like a 5%er. If you're not, you know what, this is an elf deck. If you want to hear about that, leave a comment below and I can explain in a future video a turn 2 storm kill and one of the, I believe, 2 to 3 ways it can happen. Then we get to the last one drop, Nettle Sentinel, which is a 2-mana 1/1, or a 1-mana 2/2, said that backwards, that doesn't untap during your untap step, but, well, you can read. When you cast a green spell, you untap it. So this is a really good way to generate a lot of mana with Heritage Druid, and if you have a hand with no Llanowar Elf or Elvish Mystic, I'd say playing this first is what you'd prefer doing to dropping a Heritage Druid if you have both, because you get to swing with this on turn 2, then play your Heritage Druid, untap it, and potentially make 3 mana from there, and you'd rather protect your Heritage Druid than your Nettle Sentinel in most cases, especially early. So getting your damage in for basically free, or having it eat a removal spell that you want it to, is pretty good for you. You're not really a 1-mana 2/2 deck though, so it isn't that great for you as a beater, and that's why it was the card I cut to play the 4th mana dork. Then we get on to the 2-drops. We have 4 copies of Dwinin's Elite. Just making 2 elves for 2 mana is really good. Combos with Heritage Druid, combos with Archdruid and other lords. Just puts a lot of power on the board once you start getting lords into the mix, puts more bodies on the field for Shaman and Azuri. There's really no reason to play less than a playset of these. It's probably responsible for bringing elves from obscurity into playability. It's all this and Coco. I really don't know how else to describe it. It's just a really strong glue for the deck. It's like, it's not one of your most broken cards, it just makes your broken cards better, is the best way I can put it. Which is a similar story to Elvish Visionary, which isn't a broken card. It's a 2-mana 1/1 that draws a card when it comes into play. If this card didn't have the word elf right there in its type line, this card would be completely unplayable outside of standard, I guess. I could see. No. Alright, so point being, enters battlefield, draw a card. It just helps smooth out your draws, make you a little more consistent, help you hit your collected companies and shamans and Azuris more frequently, helps with your grindy game plans. Honestly, this is one of the cards you're looking to side out post-board, though. At least in green-black. In green-white or Abzan Elves, I'd be more hesitant to, because it can dig you towards Haymaker hate cards like Rest in Peace and Stony Silence. But in just green-black, you don't really have any of that, so it's a lot more easy to cut it, and it's just a value card. I'm playing 3 here. I'd heavily consider playing 4 in both green-white and Abzan Elves. But in green-black, once again, it doesn't have the added synergies. This isn't Legacy. You can't just bounce it repeatedly and or sack it to a Cabal Therapy. So 3 feels right to me, at least. I've done a couple of games with it. Or I say a couple of games. I've done like 10, 15 leagues with it. Friendly leagues, mind you. I'm trying to get a hang of the deck still, and I'm going to move this into the competitive room fairly soon. I just want another 5, 10 leagues under my belt first. I don't have that much money to throw at the game, so I tend to be a little more conservative about it. And I want to play the best possible list I can come up with before I start devoting more money into the game. Although I'm fairly sure I could do decently well in the competitive leagues with this deck. Went on another tangent, sorry about that. Next up, Imperious Perfect. This isn't a standard inclusion for these decks, but I think this card is absolutely amazing and can single-handedly win you games. It's a lord that creates tokens that it buffs. Like, imagine that word elf said merfolk, and you'll understand why I'm so high on this card. I'm playing the full playset, could not be convinced to drop them unless this was a more combo-oriented elves deck. The value this card provides you is just so insane. It's not very reasonable. In any board stall, this card will single-handedly push through for the final points of damage. Like, just spitting out 2/2s and bigger as the game progresses is absolutely one of the least fair grindy plans this deck has. Well, outside of just dropping a Shaman of the Pack and winning on the spot, but I'm not sure how grindy I'd consider that. I mean, I guess technically regenerating cards with Azuri might be better for grinding, but if you have an Azuri, you gotta ask why you're not winning. Unless you have an Azuri and one other card. Anyway, so this card just makes your Cocos better, makes combat Cocos better, makes your aggressive starts more aggressive, gives you a more frequent 3-drop on turn 2 to put a lot of power into play and try to kill your opponent as quickly as possible. Also helps grind through situations by making tokens. Honestly, this card is just really good and you should be playing for. But here's the thing. In order to play this, as you might notice, I had to cut some, as Chapin, I believe, would say, had to kill the Sacred Cow. Well, one of them. Most Elves decks you'll see will play exactly 2 Chord of Calling. I am playing 0 Chord of Calling. The lists I saw had 2 Chord to lead the Stampede. Now, for a while, I was on the 3 to 4 lead the Stampede over Chord. In Green White Elves, Chord can help you find Selfless Spirit and other such sweeper prevention creatures, and has a couple more utility slots. This is much more of a all-in kind of aggressive deck. The only thing I'd really want to Chord for is Shaman. And honestly, I would rather be playing more impact spells than Chording for a Shaman of the Pack. I find that it's really bad early game. It can lose you games by not doing anything when you want it to or doing it too inefficiently. So I'm off of Chord of Calling right now. That is an experiment. I plan to get at least 25 games under me before I make my final decision on that, both with and without Chord. But as of now, I'm not on Chord of Calling. I don't really like it in this deck. I think it's much better in a combo-focused deck, like Abzan Company, Counters Company, whatever you want to call that deck right now. But this is not that deck. This deck is essentially, I think Elves plays out a lot more like Affinity than it does one of those decks. And I couldn't imagine playing a Chord of Calling equivalent in an Affinity deck, so I don't do it here. That said, it's closer to like Affinity Merfolk or something like that than it is to pure Affinity or to a tribal-based aggressive deck. It's very linear. It's focused on mana. This is like, take a couple seconds before what you view as the absurdity of that statement. Like, pushes you away from this. It really is like that. Once you start playing it. Obviously a little bit slower and a little bit grindier, but the point stands. Anyway, moving on. Next up, we have Elvish Archdruid, staple of the deck. Really, your best thing to do on turn 2. Be that whether or not you've gone turn 2 Heritage Druid, Dwynen's Elite into Elvish Archdruid, or just Lawnmower Elf tapped for Elvish Archdruid. The card buffs all your other elves, taps for an obscene amount of mana, and if you untap with an Elvish Archdruid in hand, and you don't have double Shaman of the Pack, it's very rare that you cannot just dump your entire hand onto the board. So, for that reason, I play the playset of Elvish Archdruid. Really shouldn't have to explain as much as I have, and probably shouldn't have. But this is definitely your best turn 2 play. Imperious Perfect is your better turn 5 play, and might be better if you're playing against a removal-based deck that maybe you thought seized and they don't have removal, so you can just start spitting out tokens as soon as possible. But that's a post-board thing, not really a pre-board thing. Pre-board, you just want to get onto the board as fast as possible and kill them before they can assemble anything that can rival what you're doing. Next up, we have what might be the best card in the deck. That's up for some debate between this Collected Company and kind of Shaman of the Back, kind of Imperious Perfect, which, yes, I'd put in the same discussion as this. This is Ezuri Renegade Leader. He's one of the things that this deck is trying to do as soon as possible. He leads to your fastest kills and most broken draws. You know what? Yeah, he's just by far the best card, except maybe Collected Company. He's definitely your best Game 1 card. And he's pretty good Game 2, because his regeneration can help stop sweepers, which is another reason I'd still consider Cord for this, just because of that 1 green regenerate elves. Well, and this could technically, but then you should have done it and killed them the turn before. Anyway, sorry, I had to yawn there. Then you have his activated ability, which basically reads win the game. It really reads cast overrun, uncounterable overrun, and basically just +3/+3. Sometimes you can activate this multiple times in a turn. Really good if you've been dropping Dwinnen's elites and such, and just really ends the game in a hurry. Or drags it out if you can't punch through for lethal, but the regeneration means your opponent can't punch through you, so you get to stalemate until you have more mana, and overrun. Ezuri is definitely both inevitability and explosiveness. So, yeah, I'd say most of the time you should play Protect the Ezuri game. You can't regenerate himself, but you can run out other must-kill threats before you drop Ezuri. And that's a good way to protect him. Point being, this is what you want to do on the turn you're winning if you have an Archdruid, because you can just drop him and activate in the same turn, and that's a really good way to kill your opponent out of nowhere. Just opponent sitting there, you have like maybe a 1/1 from Dwinnen's Elite himself, Lon Royal's Heritage Druid, and Elvish Archdruid. And your opponent's sitting there thinking, alright, I've done the math, it's not too bad, I'll leave back some blockers, I'll try and trade off, stabilize the board. You just get to go play Ezuri, tap Elvish Archdruid for 6, I believe, mana? I didn't bother doing the math. Activate Ezuri, +3/+3 to your team, swing in for lethal. And that just happened on turn 3 with your opponent not really even imagining the possibility of, oh wow, my opponent's presenting lethal next turn because he has blah blah blah. So really just the best creature in the deck. I've definitely talked too long about him though. So moving on to Shaman of the Pack. This is the reason that I like green-black elves more than green-white or Abzan elves, because you just get to cast this guy more often and more easily. In the other variants of the deck, the mana can be kind of tricky, or you just don't have black mana. So what Shaman of the Pack does is he provides you a way to finish off games that have otherwise slipped out of your reach, or end games before they've started, which is a common theme with elves actually. Most of your cards are both, or a lot of your cards are both good for hyper-aggressive starts and good for grinding out your opponent slowly with value. Like, you can hit them with a Shaman for 2 and then force in a swing, force a little bit of a battle of attrition, keep getting in the damage, or you could drop a Shaman for 10 and end the game on the spot. Really, he's one of the things you most want to hit double of off of Collected Company, more even than, like, Ezuri plus Dwinnen's Elite at end of turn, just because he can end the game on the spot when he comes into play. And that's a very powerful effect to have. And I think he's definitely your best Game 1 card, although Game 2, when he stops doing a consistent 6 to 7 damage and starts doing something more like 4 or 5, 3 even, that you'd rather just cut him and bring in some of your sideboard. also helps to bring down the curve so that you can try and go under sweepers or like fight around them. Uh, Shaman's just a very good card, and I think having him is reason enough to make your sideboard a little bit worse. Which finally brings us on to our only 4-drop, which is the best and only non-creature in the deck. This is just a staple. It's Collected Company, dominated Standard, made the Birthing Pod deck not completely dead, although it's not the utility powerhouse it once was. It keeps Malera alive, the deck alive, not the card. It does nothing about that. But really just 2 creatures, 4 mana, top 6. Helps you provide a lot of value, helps you rebuild post sweepers. There's not much I can say about this card that hasn't already been said though, so don't play less than 4. I can say that. Do not play less than 4. You're doing it wrong. Rethink your life choices. Maybe just understand Magic better. It's Collected Company. You're an elf deck. Play 4. Finally brings me into the sideboard. Let's see. Sort by name. That's not working. Color? No? Name? That's not letting me. Huh. Weird. Okay. So, I'm going to slowly separate these into ugly, ugly piles because it won't be by curve, which is what I'd prefer. Sorry about this, guys. I didn't think the deck, or that Moto would do this to me. Shows what I know. Thanks, Moto. Anyway, for removal, I play 2 Fatal Push. That's the only removal in the 75, at least for creature-specific removal. Really, you don't want to dilute your deck too much. You bring this in against Storm and Death Shadow. Really, just casting 1 removal spell is all you ever want to do, and then you want to run them over with the tempo you gained. So, only play 2. I like this more than Dismember because it can come in against Burn to kill an Eidolon, which is... Let me tell you about problem cards. You're basically nearly mono Green Storm. So, losing 4 life against an Eidolon, well, Storm doesn't do it, you don't do it. And this card is the best mono black removal spell that Modern has. It's been seeing a lot of play. I play 2 in the sideboard. Can't really say too much about it. Although I can, actually. Yeah, thought you had me there. And I thought I was going to be funny. Anyway, point being, you can sack your Horizon Canopy, or you can send in a suicidal attack if you absolutely need to get Revolt online to kill something 3 or greater. I can't imagine too many cards like that you'd suicide an attack in, but sacking Horizon Canopy to Fatal Push is definitely something I've done before, and something I will do again. Now, I haven't actually played a game with Duskwatch Recruiter yet, but I'm playing him because before I had Lead the Stampede in that slot, and while I love the card in the main deck of most Elves lists, I don't find sideboarding it is that great, because sideboard is where you start adding a lot more instant sorceries, just non-creatures in general, and it gets a lot worse, so I'd rather have something I can activate multiple times for slightly less value. So right now I'm trying out Duskwatch Recruiter. Just know that otherwise I have tried out Lead the Stampede, and that is pretty good. It could also be a not Shattering Spree. Let me look that up real quick, because that's going to bug me. And ignore this pile of draft chaff. Modern. Green, white. Both. There we go. Wait, is this? What? That's Moto being weird, I guess. No? Sorry about this. Oh, there it is. Fracturing Gust. Could be a Fracturing Gust, which is, well, just pretty good against Affinity and Lantern, but I don't think it's relevant enough to play. Oh, actually, you're gonna see something pretty interesting here. Yep. Nope, play Godic Teague. Protects against Rat. Wrong deck. That's what I need to do for my... Okay, I've made a fool of myself. Sorry, that's what I need to do for my green-white elves deck, because I forgot it existed for a while. So no. Duskwatch Recruiter, like I said, gonna see something embarrassing. And that was me forgetting that this is not my green-white elves deck. Anyway, point is, Duskwatch Recruiter, fairly value. If I could play Godic Teague to prevent a Supreme Verdict from that oh-so-popular blue-white control deck, I would. But I cannot, so I don't. Reclamation Sage. Just pretty good value. It's an elf. You can hit it off of a Coco. It can help you against Bridge from Below, against Ensnaring Bridge, and it can help you, not Bridge from Below, in place of that. That was me realizing my mistake. And it can help you against just random affinity stuff. Honestly, if it wasn't for the fact that Ensnaring Bridge exists, and that every so often you need to destroy a cranial plating, this would be the first card on the chopping block. But as both of those things are things you need to do every so often, I like Reclamation Sage quite a bit. Also prefer the promo, but they didn't have two of them, so... They didn't have two of either. That made me sad. Anyway, also, one thing to note, when you have two different arts of cards, and you're thinking of cutting one, assigning a art to the card you're thinking of replacing it with is a good way to test if you would have drawn a card in that situation that would have helped. It's not the best way to do things, but I mean it's a tool that you can use, and I just remembered it. Play a playset of Thoughtseize. This is really for the combo decks and the decks that might want to Wrath you, although then I only bring in two. And that's only occasionally. Because you can't really afford to take too many turns off, but against things like Storm, which you don't really stand a chance against without a full 4 and is somewhat popular on MTGO, and against things like Control, like the blue-white Control deck, Thoughtseize is very good at just helping you actually discard cards. Yeah, that's a failure on my part, but I can't think of that word. So, what it does is it strips out whatever card's going to be the most brutal to you, gives you the time you need to assemble a kill and assemble a kill or outvalue your opponent. You can take things ranging from Wraths to Primeval Titans and Scape Shifts. So I'd say a playset is where you want to be. Next up, to Scavenging Ooze. You can't beat Dredge. You can't really beat it with Scavenging Ooze because you don't have Rest in Peace, but it definitely gives you a potential to beat them, if that makes sense. You're not going to, but you kind of can. This is really more here for grindy creature matchups and control decks, so you can eat things, not let Snapcaster Mage kill them, Lightning Bolt heavy decks, which are more of a rarity than they used to be. But yeah, it's just kind of graveyard hate that also is a kind of grindy value creature and gives you a little bit of life. I like the card, so I play two of them. Well, it's not that I like them, so I play two. It's a good card, so I like it, and because it's a good card, I play two. And I like it because it's good. Next up, we have Kitchen Finks. A little bit of anti-burn, anti-jund, anti-control here. Also helps you push through in creature-based matchups, as a 3/2 is with Persist is fairly hard to block, at least block favorably, and provides a little bit of value, gains you a little bit of life. All in all, just good utility card, which is what you want post-board. Then we come to a little bit of spice I've been trying out, which is Nissa, Voice of Zendikar. This is the 0/1 plant token Nissa that was the scourge of a few standards back. Honestly, you're pretty much playing this because you can drop this Planeswalker turn 2 when you're playing against Wrath decks, and there's nothing nothing that you have access to that is better against a Wrath than a Planeswalker. At least in green, black. Like, I'd prefer to do this to even discarding. It really puts pressure on your opponent to put pressure on you, and if they're putting pressure on you instead of killing your creatures, then you're just getting yourself far ahead. It's worse against the black-green X decks, where they can just abrupt decay it. But even then, getting a 0/1 isn't nothing, and putting a 1/1 counter on all your creatures is probably what you'll be doing against them instead. And that's basically a Lord that doesn't pump your new creatures, but also can't be killed. The ultimate is flavor text here. You will sometimes get to it if you're planning on creating enough plant tokens to, like, say your opponent's at 5 and you're just going to pump out 5 plant tokens, then minus, to force them to Wrath again, or start using removal without committing any creatures to board, or saying you can't commit creatures to board, or you're holding up a Coco. It can force them to tap out and let you start doing other things, or use a Wrath and let you start playing other cards without having to worry about a Wrath. This is pretty much here for when games need to get grindy, or for when you just need bigger creatures and want Lord number 9 and 10. Anyway, that has been a Team Top Deck deck tech. Please let me know what you think in the comments below. If you like this kind of content, also let me know in the comments, because I'm pretty sure this was obnoxious with me forgetting. Just got off work today. Wasn't really expecting to be doing this, but realized I hadn't put out a video in a while, so kind of had to. And liking, subscribing goes a long way. I'd like this channel to get more views. I'm gonna see about making a Reddit thread for it, or like advertising on Reddit, I guess, through just comments or whatever. Not gonna lie, I have no idea how Reddit works. I'm gonna talk to my friend, who I'm gonna try and partner up with here shortly, for the videos I'm about to put out, and see if he can help me out with that. But until next time, this is Zerta with Team Top Deck, and I hope to see you in the next video.